Shading a miniature is an awesome way to take your miniatures to the next level and really help them stand out on the gaming table. When we shade a miniature, we use shade paints to darken down the recesses of a model and exaggerate the shadows. Now, there are several ways of shading a miniature. We'll start off by using a shade paint to do something called an all-over shade. Here we've got a Stormcast Eternal undercoated in Retributor armor. We're going to be applying Reikland Flesh Shade all over it. This will create a rich tone in the area and it'll add lots of depth to the recesses. Before you apply a shade paint, make sure you give it a good shake. This will ensure it's mixed properly. Then you need to choose an appropriately sized brush for the area that you're going to paint. In this case, we're painting the whole miniature, so we're going to use a medium shade brush. This will hold lots of shade paint for us and help us get the job done really quickly. It'll also help to avoid brush strokes on those larger, flatter panels. So dip into the pot and apply some paint to the palette. We don't need to thin it down at all, but we just want to control how much is on our brush. Doing this, it makes sure that the paint doesn't accidentally run out of control on our miniature. Once you're happy with the amount on your brush, then it's time to start applying it. It's best to apply this paint heavily and neatly while being careful to control any excess pooling. If you notice the paint is sitting too much in any of the recesses, clean off your brush and use that to soak up the excess. When you're doing this, make sure you do it while the paint is still wet. If we try and move the paint around while it's still drying, this could create unwanted texture on our miniatures. When we're applying shades over large areas like this, it's best to work quite quickly and divide the model into sections. This helps you keep track of the pooling and make sure the paint dries evenly. Once you've finished applying this all over your miniature, we'll need to leave it for around 30 minutes to dry. And there we are. In just a quick and easy step, we've added so much to our miniature. You might notice that applying a shade all over like this changes the overall colour of the area. If you'd like to focus the depth into the recesses, we can do something called a recess shade. And we'll show you how to do this now. A recess shade is a fantastic way to exaggerate those shadows, but keep the colour of the flat surfaces the same. All we do for this is drop the shade into the recessed areas of a miniature. Here we've got a Blood Angels Infernus Marine undercoated in Mephiston Red. We'll be using Berserker Blood shades in the recesses to really make that armour stand out. For this, we'll need an appropriately sized brush so that we can control the amount of paint going onto our model. We'll be using a small layer brush here, as we want to be as neat as possible. Recess shading can be quite time consuming, but it's well worth the effort. Plus, the paint will dry quicker than if you do an all-over shade. Just take your time and work your way around the model, dropping the shade into those recesses. If you make any mistakes, don't worry. Just tidy back up with whatever colour you used as the base coat. In this case, we're just thinning down some Mephiston Red and using this to tidy back up. And now that we've worked our way around the miniature, dropping the shade into all those recesses, you can see how that armour really stands out and is going to look great on the gaming table once the model is finished. Now, shade paints are a super quick way to make your miniatures look great. However, you can also use contrast paints as well as base and layer paints to shade your miniatures. This is perfect if you're after a really specific colour or you just don't have the one you need to hand. For example, we can use the contrast paint Basilicanum Grey to recess shade our miniatures. Apply this just like we showed you earlier. Here we're applying it to an Ultramarines Terminator and we're just dropping it into all those panel lines where the armour panels meet. Don't forget, if you make any mistakes and get any splodges anywhere, just tidy back up with your previous colours. We can also thin this down and use it as a wash. In this case, we'll be using it on the silver details. We'll be using 1 part contrast medium to 1 part Basilicanum Grey and mixing this on our palette. We're thinning it down here so that it flows better onto our miniature and it acts more as a shade. Doing this also means that the colour isn't quite so strong, so it doesn't overpower those base coats. With that shade done, you can see how awesome that Terminator armour is already looking. Now, we can also thin down base and layer paints, and we can use Lamia Medium to do this. If we're going to use these as a shade, we need to thin them down to around the same consistency as a shade paint. Here we're going to add 4 parts Lamia Medium to our palette and then 1 part Calgar Blue. We'll mix this together and you can see that it resembles the consistency of a shade paint. We'll be using this to add a cool blue recess shade to that Terminator helmet. You'll see that once we've thinned it down like this, it also behaves just like a normal shade paint. So in this instance, we're just going to drop it into the recesses of the helmet and we'll get that really awesome blue effect. Now you know this technique. We can use this to add loads of different effects and really make the most out of the paints that we've already got to hand. And there we are. Now you know everything you need to know about shading your miniatures. All of the techniques shown can be used to add awesome effects to your miniatures and help them really stand out on the tabletop. If you'd like more help with your Warhammer painting journey, check out our other Painting Essentials videos. These are packed full of tips that will really help you along. Well, we hope you've enjoyed the video and we'll see you next time. Bye!